I don't know, should I say this? Should I admit it out loud? I mean, a lot of my students already know this. Number 14 is my least favorite Altès Etude. It is just so repetitive. So when students come in and it's time for them to play number 14, I say, no, we're to number 14. Oh, okay, I'll hear you play it. So I recorded this out of solidarity with my students. I recorded the 4 pages even with all of the repeats so that I can walk a mile in your shoes. But I will say it's been good for me to play it because I find that I actually greatly prefer playing it to listening to it. And of course, Mr. Altès, I completely understand what you've done here. This is very repetitive. That's what bothers me. But there are lots of things that if you play them 3 or 4, even 5 times, they're not so bad. But by the time you play 6 or 7 or 8 times, it's very repetitive and it gets hard for our fingers to just maintain the discipline and control. So I understand what he was doing. Another thing that can get you in the mood to play this number 14 is to notice that it's marked scherzo. So think of it as being a joke, being playful, being like a dance, and that makes it a little bit less tedious to go through all the repetitions. And I like to think of this as a gruppetto exercise or a turn exercise. That's actually not the way Altès describes it. He describes it like number 13 as a trill exercise, and he mentions trills with terminations. But again, Mr. Altès, you and I can understand each other because what is a turn except a trill with a termination? 1 trill plus that trill's termination. So you can think of it either way, but once again, as I said with 13, I would first of all practice it with real fingerings, have the discipline to get the real fingerings clean and even, and once you've got that, then you can switch to trill fingerings. But here's my plea as a flute teacher. When you switch to trill fingerings, do not guess what the trill fingerings are. There's information everywhere these days. If you don't know, you can find it so easily. Look it up. Don't play the trill fingerings wrong. You're going to play them too many times to play them wrong. Look it up. Think of it as a sign of how you're going to be with your future. Are you going to be proactive and go and find the information that's there for you? Or are you going to be passive and not take charge of your own future? That's pretty dramatic, but I'm always correcting trill fingerings, and I know that if my students just looked up the fingerings, they're right there, easy to find. This is another great example of an etude to do fish breaths. There are plenty of breath marks that are indicated in here. I ignore them all because you can breathe everywhere, at least for the first part and the last part of the etude. The middle part of the etude, I am sure Altès put in as a big contrast, that you have long sections under slurs where you have very few opportunities to breathe. And so those sections, I like to do what he says, play it pianissimo, and really go for the long phrases and try to make it all the way through on one breath. That's difficult, but it's also great training to learn exactly how much you have in your lungs and how to measure your breath out so that you can make it through. I totally take advantage of that pianissimo because it can so greatly prolong your lung capacity not to use too much air in those sections. The loudest motorcycle ever. Well, the only other thing I wanted to say about this is that the last section is marked tempo 1, and I think that can be fairly confusing because there's no tempo 2 anywhere. So I think he's simply emphasizing here that even though now every measure has 7 notes instead of 5 notes, it's the same tempo that you started, which actually means the biggest test here is picking your starting tempo. So you have to choose your first tempo based on what you want this last tempo to be. Mr. Altès, I hope we can still be friends. I hope you understand that in general, I love your etudes. They're so useful for my students. They're melodic. They have a lot of variety. They're so much more interesting than so many other collections of etudes. Obviously, I get a lot of use out of them. They're very intelligently and well written. You can understand, right?